Today's story comes from the Whimsical Times, a work of truth through allegory. And this concerns the island of Gully Bull. The people of Gully Bull were a very wholesome sort of people. They were hard-working, they cared for one another, and they looked after one another, and they were quite benevolent and all those things. But they were ruled by a tyrannical government, a government of greedy men, of elites who thought they were better than the Gully Bull people. They thought that they should have everything. And because of that, they were taxing the people of Gully Bull as much as they could. They had these ideas that they wanted the countryside for themselves, and that if they could shove all the people of Gully Bull into a small little tight location, making sure that everything was available within a 15-minute walk, it would be suitable and keep them off their back. But the problem the government realised was that there were quite a lot of these Gully Bull people, and they disliked that. What can we do, they thought to themselves. If only we could get rid of them somehow. Only to wait for them to die off, of course, wouldn't work, because they continued to procreate and have more of these Gully Bulls. So they figured they would need to intervene in a rather nasty and nefarious way. And so, from the Fauci tree, they came up with a nasty virus. And they spread this virus through the land, telling everybody that it was going to get them and that they would all die in a horrible and agonising death unless they took the magic solution that the government's own scientists had come up with. And it was, of course, safe and effective, so they said. But only members of the government knew that there was something rather nasty inside this magic juice. But the people of Gully Bull were so scared by the constant reminders of how this virus was going to knock them down and kill their elderly and their people who weren't so fit, that they all lined up and they had the magic juice injected into them. Not all of them, of course, did this. There were a few less gullibles than the main gullibles who were a bit nervous about this. In fact, quite a lot of them, and they stayed away. Well, in time, of course, people who had had the magic injection were having all sorts of issues, heart problems, strokes, they couldn't walk straight, some of them just collapsed there and then. And anybody who spoke about this was laughed at and ridiculed by the government and many of the government workers who posed as other members of Gully Bull themselves. But this still hadn't got rid of enough of the population. And so the government were thinking, well, we've managed to lower the immune system of pretty much 80% of the population. Maybe what we need to do is have another airborne disease that can come and attack them. But this time, instead of a virus which was floating in the air before, we'll tell people that it's in the birds, the feathered variety. And so that the birds would swoop around and infect the animals of the land, making the land obviously a place that you wouldn't want to go, because the rabbits and the stoats and the badgers and the foxes, the cows, the horses and the pigs and so forth would all be infected, and any of these Gully Bull people, if they went anywhere near them, they too would get infected. So the best thing could be that these Gully Bull people would go and get contained in that tiny little area where everything was within a 15-minute walk. But better than that, they would come up with yet another magic juice. They'd label it differently, but it was probably pretty much the same stuff as before, because they'd ordered so much of it, they needed to get shot of this stuff. And so again, people were advised to come forward to have the injection, knowing that this time, the government knowing this is, that it would really be the fatal blow. However, having been bitten the first time, many of the gullibles were able to talk freely with the knowledgeables, and they all started to think, you know, this is a little bit strange, isn't it? It's almost as if it's a repeat. They're doing the same old trick. And we're not sure that this is quite so true. They really are pushing us into these tiny little areas, and many of them were waking up and going, I don't think we're going to have this. And soon there was a bit of rebellion. There were a few very, very gullibles who were welcome to have the magic juice, But most of the population had wised up and were saying, no, thank you. And in fact, they were turning to the wise women who had herbal remedies, and they knew things like supplements were the benefit for them. They'd been around for thousands of years. Things like iodine and vitamin D and vitamin C and things like that. Things that were in the landscape and that they knew was good and was actually there to boost the immunity and to keep them well. And the government were incensed. Why isn't this working? And slowly the government themselves were becoming crumbling and arguing with one another until they were fighting amongst themselves. And the gullible people and the knowledgeable people had ganged up and surrounded the house where all these elites went and were laughing at them and saying, you know what? We don't want you leading us anymore, you horrible, lying, conniving people. We don't want the elites leading us. We're changing the government. Goodbye. And they rounded them up, put them on a boat and sent them into the sea where these elites were never seen again. And so that is the story from the Whimsical Times, a work of truth and allegory. And I hope you enjoyed it.